Hello, good afternoon, everyone. A very warm welcome to you all joining us today at today's Thoughtful Thursday session. So for anyone joining us who doesn't know who we are Irish in Britain, and we're a membership charity supporting a network of Irish organisations throughout Britain, then the growth and development and well-being of those organisations and the wider community. I will be hosting today's session. So before I hand over to my colleague and our speaker for today, just a few bits of housekeeping. So anyone attending isn't on camera and your microphones are off. Today's session is being recorded and it will be uploaded onto our website after the session, so anyone can view that. If you have any questions or contributions, if you look to the bottom of the screen, we have both a chat box and a Q&A box where you can post any contributions throughout the session, and I will monitor that. And we will also hold space with our speaker towards the end for some Q&A. If anyone who is attending today doesn't wish to be contacted further about any of these sessions, you can let me know in the chat box or by email after today's session. I think that's all the housekeeping, so I'm going to now hand over to Zibby, who is our Quivner coordinator, who will speak briefly and she will introduce our speaker for today.
Thank you, Aisling, and a warm welcome to everybody to our Irish in Britain Quivner Thoughtful Thursday session. Quivner is an Irish word which means memory, and in Irish in Britain, in our charity, we're very keen to find different ways of recording and preserving and sharing the memories of people from the Irish community. And we have a whole strand of our work around memory and reminiscence. We're delighted today to be joined by Ethel Corduff, who I will introduce shortly, and also by two other panellists who are going to help put questions to Ethel today. We have Dr. Mary Tilkey and we have Anne Jarvis, and I will just ask Mary to turn on your, to introduce yourself to the group.
Oh, good afternoon, everybody, and thank you, Zibby. I'm Mary Tilkey, formerly chair of Irish in Britain, but in more recent times I've been co-founder and I suppose activist in relation to the Quivner Memory Project, very passionate about the needs of Irish people, but particularly those with dementia. I'm really delighted to be here today with Ethel. I've known Ethel for a number of years now, and I'm really looking forward to delving into the book. It looks lovely, so I'm really, really pleased to be here today and looking forward to hearing Ethel speak about it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mary, and I'm now going to ask Anne Jarvis to introduce herself. She will also be on the panel today.
Oh, hi, my name's Anne Jarvis and I'm of Irish descent. I've been involved with the Quivner project for the last 4 years. I got involved through Mary Tilkey and it was through a project I was doing around nurses, not Irish nurses, but I'm sure that there will be some aspects of Ethel's talk that I can bring into the conversation today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Anne. And now we very warmly welcome Ethel Corduff. Ethel, some of you will know, has worked within the NHS for 40 years, and she spent a considerable amount of time doing a lot of very important research around the topic of Irish nurses, and has just this month her book on this has been published, and she's going to shortly read an extract from her book and then talk about how she came to write it and some of the things that she found out. Ethel is originally from Tralee in Ireland, and I'm going to hand over Ethel now to introduce herself and to read from her book.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for coming to listen to me today. I spent many years nursing, and I realised there was so little information about Irish nurses. I started in 1964 in Stoke-on-Trent, and later, after training, I came down to London. I started a course at the then London Polytech, And I went to a seminar there where it was said there was little research done on Irish women. So I decided to show them an article that I had done on Irish nurses, just a short piece I had done during a course. And the administrator, Dr. Clinton, he was very interested, and he asked me to enlarge on it and to hold a seminar, which actually made me do more work. And I put it together. It was quite short, I think about 6 pages or so. And I held the seminar. And actually the night of the seminar, Dr. Clinton was actually called away urgently because he was the chief of Islington Council, and there was some major catastrophe. So I had to do the seminar without him. So that was a bit daunting. And he then put it into a booklet for what was called P&L publications. But it never came to fruition because he lost, his job came to an end. So it really became mothballed. So for a long time, I didn't do anything, And then later on, when I did a part-time degree at the London Met, Health and Irish Studies, I did Irish Nurses in London, an article, a survey, and published that, and that is actually in my book. Also, I started putting it together gradually, more and more research, sent it to the what was called Psychiatric Press at the Royal College of Nursing, and it was a bit rough. It really was, and not interesting. It was mostly statistics and figures and things, and they thought it lacked personal stories. So it was rejected, which was fine because obviously that was it. So then I started trying to get personal stories, interviewing my colleague, sometimes in the middle of the night. Sometimes in a break, I would go to another ward and interview somebody, just to get their stories, which is, which actually I found quite interesting. And the more stories I got, the more I was into it, I'll read an extract now. This is actually about my journey. How I went into nursing. I left school at 15, which was fairly young, but not unusual then, after passing the intermediate certificate. My mother persuaded the owner of the local book record and fancy goods shop to employ me. To begin with, the wages were a measly £1 a week, and after 2 years, they went up to the grand sum of £4 weekly. The reason for the large increase was mainly due to the sudden deaths of the manageress and the buyer, who was also the window dresser, within a fortnight of each other. Very sad events that led to me taking over both their roles practically overnight. And I really didn't know anything about ordering window displays or anything like that. And the owners did not know either and did not interfere too much. And I began to enjoy the responsibility. But 2 years later, the return from Dublin of the owner's daughter, who wanted to run the shop and it started changing everything I had done, eventually decided me, after 4 years, to give in my notice. An unhappy and lonely year in Dublin, living and working in a combined grocery and newspaper store. Then after a few months at home, helping my father run our little shop while my mother was in hospital, I was off again. I took a summer job in the tourist town of Killarney, but they would not raise my wages for the second season, even by £1, even though the owner said I had increased his business by 50%. Anyway, that was a turning point for me. I thought I just can't, take this anymore. And it was time to take stock. I felt there was no future for me in Ireland at that time. I wanted a job with some prospects, and most of my friends had gone nursing to England. My mind was made up overnight, literally overnight, that I would go to England. I answered 2 advertisements for student nurses, one in the Universe, a Catholic publication, which I thought would only give a reputable, hospital. And it was an easy way of getting to England and having accommodation arranged. And there would be other Irish girls in the nurses' home. I wrote to hospitals in Eastbourne and Stoke-on-Trent. I decided the first one to reply I would go to. So the City General Hospital was the first and asked for 2 references. I sent them on, one from the parish priest and another from the shop where I'd worked for 4 years. Within a few weeks, I received a letter of acceptance from Matron Brown with an invitation to start as soon as possible as a pre-nursing student before the next preliminary training began. I was so busy with the preparations for the journey, I did not take much notice of the friends and neighbours who were all astonished at my news. They said girls who went nursing always wanted to go nursing. And how could I study after so many years away from school? My mother too was fearful, but delighted at my choice, and took out savings to pay for my fare and to buy the items on the list Matron Brown had sent. Textbooks were very expensive, as were the horrible old-fashioned black leather shoes that I soon discarded after arriving at the hospital. I was so excited on departure day, I just did not feel sad. It was my first time ever to leave Ireland, even for a holiday. Matron Brown had sent instructions for the journey and had also informed me that a Margaret Smythe would be travelling from Athlone and would be on the same boat as me. I then exchanged letters with Margaret Smythe and we described what we were both wearing. On the boat for Liverpool, I searched for Margaret, but never saw her. I was among the first up on deck when we docked. I was struck by the gloominess of the docks and the strange accents about me. Shortly after at Liverpool railway station, I was accosted by a woman who said she was from a Christian organisation and had I accommodation arranged. Heeding my mother's warnings, I tried not to engage in conversation with her. Not sure now if she was from the Legion of Mary, as I found out later, seemed to have a habit of not turning up when it was arranged that they would. After discovering which train was for Crewe, I put my luggage on it. Because it was not due to leave for 20 minutes, I was ravenous and I went to something to eat. And while I was in the buffet shortly after, I saw through the window the train carrying my luggage steaming out of the station. I rushed to the nearest parcel office in a panic, and they told me they would arrange for my luggage to be taken off at the next station. And this is exactly what happened. The sight from the train to Crewe was a shock. I gazed at rows of grimy houses surrounded by gloomy industrial buildings. An occasional patch of green was the only relief from the bleak landscape. Crewe was a big, noisy, dirty station where I boarded the train for Stoke-on-Trent. And as the train neared my destination, it was horrifying to see the sight of chimneys everywhere. Smoke filled the sky. There were many strange-looking buildings. I was discovered later. They were kilns. I was now in the potteries. A taxi took me to the nurse's home. The route was past many dark red brick houses, and as I stood in the hall, a tall, thin figure in grey approached. "Can I help you?" she said, as she stared at my luggage. "I've just come from Ireland," I said, handing her matron's letter. After glancing at it, she smiled. "I thought as much. We don't get Irish nurses at the North staffs. They all go to the City General." So she phoned for a taxi. I was bundled in and arrived at the City General within a few minutes. The nurse's home was a huge brick building with numerous windows, sat on a grassy, greasy slope. The site is now a car park. As I stumbled into the hall with my luggage, a thin, nervous-looking girl with long dark hair rushed over to me. "You must be Ethel. I'm Margaret Smythe. No wonder I could not find you on the boat. You are wearing a hat. The Home Sister, Sister Davis, is waiting for you." I could not understand why she was so nervous. She was almost shaking. I was so relaxed. I was rubbing in hand cream while we talked. That might be enough of an extract to read for now. So, I think as well that when you go nursing, I think it is important to want to do it, because I found it very difficult, especially those first 6 weeks when I was in the premature baby unit, sent in there literally without any knowledge, and to care for those little babies, and spending most of the time in the sluice. And the other girls seemed to know so much. And after a couple of weeks, I thought I couldn't stick it any longer, because that time we had to wear masks. Now we're wearing masks every day and having to. But that time it was unusual. And in the premature baby unit, we had to wear them all the time. And the heat was horrendous. I mean, it was so warm compared to Ireland. I was so used to so much rain, and the heat, I was absolutely sweating. So one day I thought, I can't take it anymore. You know, I went over to matron's office and, you know, said that I'm going to leave. And she went absolutely berserk. I mean, she really did. She absolutely tore into me. I came out of there absolutely in a terrible state. And when I went back to the residence where we were living, we were actually in the doctor's residence, not the nurse's home at that time, because there was some vacant rooms in the doctor's residence. And I went into the sitting room and I was telling them what I had done. And they all said, what? We all hate it, they said. We have to stick it out, he said, until we get to London. Because in London, there are so many Irish, and that's where they all seem to, want to go, you know, where there were so many Irish dance halls, etc. Anyway, I was so, embarrassed and ashamed at my behavior. And I thought, how can I face home and say that I've left, that I've given up after just a couple of weeks, and all the neighbors and friends would be thinking, oh, told you so. So I phoned my sister, and she couldn't give a solution. She said, just do what you think is best. So within an hour, I was back at matron's office again in a disheveled state. And I told her I was going to, you know, I wanted to stay and that I was sorry. And she went berserk again and told me I was a disgrace, etc., etc. And she said, if I let you stay, you cannot leave. So I was stuck there then. I had to stay, and I couldn't leave. And I did stick it out, and I did, you know, I did get to love it. I mean, I really did. But it took quite a while, and it wasn't easy. I think especially at the age of 22, when you've left school for quite a long period, and in that period you haven't done any study. But I had always wanted to write. In fact, I wrote my first story, I think, when I was about 10, and it was called The Treasure Hunters. I remember. And from then on, I was a one day book reader at the Carnegie Library. And I was always writing, looking at encyclopedias, trying to figure out grammar, etc., and reading. So, you know, that was it. And all these, you know, Irish nurses, there were just so many at that time, especially in Stoke-on-Trent. You know, we had an Irish matron, and it was very religious orientated. I mean, we were asked to pay Christmas and Easter dues, which was unheard of, really. You know, for the local church, and some nurses rebelled against that. But you know, there was a lot of camaraderie. I mean, the nurses' home was a great place, really, and there was just so many friendships. I always remember I think it was on Thursday nights when we used to be waiting to go on night duty, and we would be in the sitting room, ready to go on night duty from about 7 onwards. And it was the night when emergency ward 10 would be on, and there was also the Top of the Pops. And there used to be terrible ructions, because some people wanted to watch emergency ward 10. and others wanted to watch Top of the Pops. And I remember once the argument got so bad, somebody stood in front of the television and turned it off because no agreement could be come to, you know. But that was unusual. I mean, apart from that, there was great camaraderie. There really was, and you know, there was a lot of camaraderie. And the assistant matron there as well was. She was Irish too, Miss Keegan, and she was very strict, and we had to go to mass. There was a chapel in the grounds. I remember on Tuesday morning we had a very early mass. I think it was about 6 a.m. Very early. And then matron also, you know, she liked the nurses to go to mass in Newcastle under Lyne, which is the nearest town, and she would be there practically every time, so she would see who would be there. So, you know, this is, you know, it was very much, all that would not be accepted now. It just wouldn't be accepted now, you know. And most people, I mean, some people married and stayed in Stoke-on-Trent and lived their lives there. Others moved on, and a lot of them moved to London. London was the ultimate destination, really, where people wanted to go. They really wanted to go to London, and because of the dance halls, even though there was a local Mecca dance hall, it was never the same as the dance halls in London. In fact, one of the chapters in the book I've got the dancing nurses, because every nurse was dancing. Some nurses were dancing every night of the week, and yet still up in the morning for duty. I mean, it's hard to understand how it was done, but they did, and they travelled all over London to all the dance halls. They really did. I mean, absolutely. Some people went on to do midwifery then. I think midwifery was it was like the next step for some reason, you know, and some people did part one and it didn't continue because they just felt it wasn't for them. But for most people, they went on to do midwifery. I think one or two went on to do psychiatric nursing, but not that many. But if you were psychiatric trained as well as general trained, it was a plus, you know. And others went on to be ward sisters, you know, and further their career. But of course, that time there was no extra courses really, apart from the midwifery. There wasn't anything like there is now, or all these specialist roles that there are today. And then coming to London, I mean, most people went to London, but in the past, you know, in my research, I found most people, a lot went to Lancashire. And I think one of the reasons for that might have been to do with the Industrial Revolution, because there would be a lot of accidents, you know, people needing more care. And also there was mining, you know, industrial diseases, you know, exactly up there in that area. Also, the other thing that really struck me was the amount of trained nurses that left Ireland. There was an awful lot of trained nurses left Ireland to work in England, including midwives trained in Ireland. And one of the reasons really why trained nurses left Ireland is because the hospitals in Ireland were run by nuns. They really had a stronghold in the hospitals. They were running, I mean, a nun was a matron, and even in the workhouses and everything. And she could appoint staff without really any proper interviews, you know. So those staff were there permanently as nuns. A lot of them were not properly trained, and that's another thing. They were not properly trained, and you know, they were permanent there, and it meant that there was very little chance of promotion. these nurses, were unable to get promotion. So naturally they became dissatisfied. And also they worked in a religious regime, which may not have suited them. And actually some of the, some of what I found, and also from a very good researcher, Mark Longley, who did some research on the Irish Nurses Union going way back, and that the union had a lot of connections with the nuns due to some difficulties, as I mentioned, that little chance of promotion, and also the there was other things to do with religion, and I think the archbishop, ruled the roost as well, and there were certain rules, and at that time the Irish Nurses Union was run by they had some Protestant leaders who actually challenged the bishops. They challenged them to about this religious regime and about the nuns, because the nuns did not do night duty. So the nuns did not do night duty, and they were allowed not to do night duty because they had to be up early. They had to fast for Holy Communion at that time. That, of course, doesn't apply today. And they had to, another reason was they had to be up early for choir singing. Anyway, the nuns were not allowed to do night duty, and that was one of the major things that the union was dealing with, because it meant that the lay nurses were doing all the night duty, and some of them for years and years and years. And then that union later became more of a Catholic ethos, because it was taken over by the president of the Catholic Nurses Association, and also by Annie Smithson, who became the General Secretary. She was a novelist. She wrote many books, a lot with nursing themes. In fact, I've got her in my book as one of the Irish nursing leaders, because she trained in Chelsea, and also she went to Scotland. She went to Edinburgh to do her district training, and she became the General Secretary of the Union, and she had been a Protestant and had become a Catholic, and the ethos of the Union changed then, and there was not so much challenging of the bishops. I mean, I found that was very interesting, really, because it gave you a picture also of why so many trained nurses left Ireland, That's right. Also, going back a bit to Florence Nightingale, she dealt with the Irish nursing nuns rather than Irish nurses in the Crimean War, and also in London, because she was, with Sister Mary Clare, who was the head of the Bermondsey Convent. She developed a great friendship with her while in the Crimean War, and that friendship was kept up. But there was another challenge to Florence Nightingale from another Irish sister, who there was conflict between her in the Crimea, and also there was plenty challenges there. I mean, earlier nurses really went, they went to Lancashire, they went to other areas. They were, they were recruited. Often it was they got a reference from a parish priest. And the work of Christopher Meggs looked at a lot of that, and I have quoted some of that. They were often recruited on the strength of a photograph. They were a photograph was looked at, and you know, whether they looked all right or not, often they were chosen because they looked all right in a photo, which it seems extraordinary now. But also their handwriting was taken into account as well, because of course in those days they couldn't really travel for interviews. It was just too difficult, you know, and coming from Ireland. So really it was on the strength of a photograph, and also their handwriting. Some were rejected because their handwriting was not good, because they spelling, etc. But you know, they were accepted, and they went down to in Meggs's work. They went down to hospitals more in the not in London. His work was really more on the south coast, Southampton, and also Hampshire, places like that, you know. And I do I do mention his figures there. The other thing, I think someone has asked a question about the war, about how many nurses came in the war, and how many nurses, Irish nurses, came in the war years, and how many nurses there are today. Now, because my research ended in the Millennium, I don't really have you know, correct figures for today, but the figures that I do have, but not in my book, today, roughly 12,600 Irish work for the NHS, and 5,000 are nurses, midwives, or health visitors. Now that figure may not be correct now, and also it doesn't include the students. It doesn't include the students who are in the universities, but I will try and get those figures. But as I said, because I was finishing the book in the Millennium, I didn't delve too deeply into that. I think with the wartime, I did try to get wartime figures. I did try to get wartime figures, but it wasn't. Yeah, I think what I'm saying on no figures were available at the time of research for the number of staff who came from Ireland to Britain to nurse during the war years. In 1945, thousands of young women went from Ireland to England to take up nurse training. That year, the total number of nursing staff, that's all nursing staff, was 240,000, of whom 88% were trained, and about 10,000 were still attached to the armed service. In the Ministry of Health report of the 31st of March 1946, it was felt that the staffing of the hospitals by Irish and Baltic women was for short-term purposes only and could not be a lasting solution. Despite this, advertisements for trainee nurses continued to be inserted in many Irish newspapers, particularly from hospitals where the matron or the assistant matron was Irish. So I mean, it was a lot, and of course a lot of recruitment took place in Ireland as well. And in unemployment among nurses in Ireland continued into the 1940s, except in midwifery, where the shortages were considered by the Central Midwives Board to be due to a financial matter. This shortage may have contributed to an influx of Irish women who came to train, mostly in general nursing, in England. 3,000 young Irish women went to England in 1945. So it would be, you know, to take up nurse training. So that was it.
Thank you very much, Ethel. We would like to move now into a chance to ask you some questions.
Yes, thank you.
We'll put them, Mary, Aisling, Anne and I will put questions to you for the rest of the session.
Yes, thank you very much.
First question that we have is, what did you personally enjoy most about nursing? What have you enjoyed about nursing yourself?
I think one of the things I enjoyed really was the camaraderie with my colleagues. And I wasn't just talking about, and not just talking about Irish nurses here, because I made friends with many people from many countries. But generally the Irish stuck together. I will say that, and I think that was because there were so many of us really as well, and also being far from home, and because we lived at the nurses' home. I mean, for instance, in Stoke-on-Trent, when I was in Stoke-on-Trent, people who were local often lived at home, so we didn't, we didn't have so much camaraderie with them when we were off duty. It was because they went home after their shifts, But living in the nurses' home, I think the nurses' home is a really important part of nursing, and I think people miss out today. The students miss out today because of that, and also the patients. I mean, I really, really enjoyed caring for the patients. I mean, it could be tough. Also, we had huge responsibility. We were in charge of wards on night duty when we were in our second years, which was really, serious. I mean, very responsible, but it was really a great experience, It was very, very good experience. So overall, I mean, nursing, is, I wouldn't call it a vocation. Some people don't, wouldn't think of it as a vocation, but it was definitely a good career, and you had a chance of going anywhere really, and continuing and progressing up the ladder. I became a ward sister when after moving to Croydon. I became a ward sister after a year, and then later on, years later, I was an acting ward manager before I retired. So you have good good chances of promotion, and caring for people is always rewarding. It's very rewarding. It really is. I mean, it can give you great sense of satisfaction. I think is one of the things as well. Yeah. So I think that about sums up.
Thank you, Ethel. I have another question, and then I'm going to bring Mary in. The next question is, who has inspired you in your nursing and your writing career? Who has
inspired me in my writing career? Well, I think actually my mother actually gave me the name of a writer. She actually called me after the writer Ethel, who is obsolete now, really. I mean, nobody reads her. And because she liked her books. My mother was a reader, and she liked Ethel's books. And I was the only person in the town of Tralee with the name Ethel, which she invented. So I think for some reason, I mean, that didn't inspire me, but I think it kind of gave it an impetus to it, and I don't know, I think it was all the readers, all the books I read. I was, I was trying to emulate them, really. I think there was, some great writers I remember in my childhood, especially Malcolm Saville and Noel Straightfield. I admired those writers. I studied their writing. I tried. Not because I would want to do children's writing, but I did. I did aspire to it. And actually, what I actually prefer really is non-fiction. Because when I was 17 years of age, I wrote an article under an under plume. For the local paper, and it was published. And then I wrote another article for another paper with another nom de plume. And the reason for the nom de plume was because I was writing about local things, and And the first article I was writing as an immigrant, which of course I wasn't, you know, so that started me off, you know. And then I had quite a lot of stuff published in Irish publications over the years, you know, yeah. But writers, I mean, writing is a great escape, really. It really is, especially, especially, you know, if you want escapism from any problems, I think is another thing, you know, yeah. And also with the nurses' stories, I mean, one story I've got in my book is Betty Fennell. And sadly, she died at the weekend. I think she was 92, 93. And but she had got my leaflet. She'd seen my leaflet with her picture in it, which was good. But unfortunately, she didn't get to see the book. And it's nice that her story is carried on. You know, that's what I really you know, really pleased about that. You know, that when people are gone, that you know, their stories live on. You know, yes. And perhaps the nurses of today can learn from them, but I'm not sure if that's going to be the case, because the training is oriented quite differently now, you know. But yeah, we had so I think that was you know, writing non-fiction. I actually prefer non-fiction because I like research. I like looking for the facts, finding out about people, and you know, being factual. The trouble is when you're being factual, you have to produce figures as well, and sometimes that can be a bit boring to readers, but it's important too, you know, especially like wartime, you know, especially important times, you know, like that. So yeah. Yes.
Can I ask you, Ethel, what was your favourite specialty when you were nursing?
I think elderly care.
And
I really liked elderly care. I was, you know, when I came down to Croydon first, I went to Queen's Hospital. I did agency work on the bank. Well, it wasn't the bank then. I did agency work at Queen's Hospital. Everybody seemed to do agency work for a while as well after training at that time, if they could, especially in London, because it was readily, you know, it was easy to get. I went to Queen's and I was there for about a year, and then I went to Croydon General on the staff, but that was acute. And when that hospital closed, I went to another hospital. Each hospital I was in was closing, you know. That was the norm at that time. Everyone was closing. You were really moving on, you know. Yeah, you were moving on. And I opted for elderly care. I never looked back from that. I just found, you know, really looking after the elderly very rewarding. Not as stressful as acute nursing as well, you know, because it was more, there was more care involved, more, you know, you were, you know, more one-to-one. You didn't have such a high turnover of patients. Now, of course, that is happening.
Very different, yeah.
Now it's happening, you know. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, now it's happening. I mean, just to be in hospital for a day or two now is the norm, you know.
That's right.
That time it was weeks and literally months. And you got, and the other thing is you got to know them really well because they were in so long, you know. Yeah. And also I think we had more time to care for them. We had, you know,
very different now.
Very different now, yeah. I mean, they didn't have so many, I wouldn't say they didn't have so many pressure sores. We were able to turn them more often. We were able to, you know, spend more time feeding them, you know, and, you know, communicating with them.
Real nursing, yeah.
Yeah, that's important too, to communicate with them as well, you know, yeah.
Okay, Ethel, I think Anne Jervis has got a question possibly in that vein to ask you. So I'll ask Anne to ask her question to come in.
Okay, Ethel, 40 years, that's great, a long time in the NHS. Nurse training, that has changed so much over that time. And what are your thoughts on change for the best, or do you think even as harsh as it was, the training you had was very good?
I think, I mean, my husband has been in hospital recently, so I can speak for that. I mean, he was given excellent care. He really was. I mean, I took him to casualty because he was so unwell, and also because it was difficult to get the GP. I think that's another thing. With the GP surgeries now, it's so difficult to be seen. They don't come to the house. And if you're too ill to go to the surgery, it's just too difficult. I just took him in the car to casualty, and they admitted him straight away. And he had excellent care. Actually, he was in an elderly care ward as well, because he was that age, of course. And I couldn't fault it. But having said that, my cousin in Ireland is having a terrible time with her husband in hospital at the terrible care he's receiving in a hospital in Southern Ireland. And she read out to me the litany of things that her son kept in a diary, and it was absolutely horrifying, And I did say to her, I wish he was cared for by the NHS. I did. I really did, because I felt that he would get better care, So I think, I'm not saying it's improved, but I think, I couldn't fault what I found, and just recently, myself. But having said that, they've had to cope with COVID, which has been really,
very difficult.
It must be really horrendous,
Okay.
And it must be really, really difficult, Yeah. So I think overall it's how you find it, I mean, but I think there's more technology, and also you get results quickly, which I think is great. I mean, it's all all done online quickly, the blood results, the X-ray results, whereas before you had to wait, sometimes days for results, so it means I think people can get better treatment. But I think physical nursing care was probably, I won't say better, but I think we had more time.
Okay.
And having more time without fast pacing, I think is really important too, Yeah.
Okay, that's lovely. Thank you, Ethel.
I hope that answers your question.
Yes, no, just intrigued, how it just seemed so harsh, the regime, that it wasn't, didn't seem to be a lot of empathy or kindness at times to the story you gave to start with, where you were placed as a young girl, 2 weeks straight away into the special care, the baby care unit. You didn't seem to have much preparation for it.
Actually, believe it or not, when I was a second year, I was in charge of that baby care unit for an afternoon on a regular basis. Would you believe it? I mean, it was absolutely huge responsibility, because all these babies were in incubators, But I had great backup with the staff that were on with me. I mean, when I say backup, because at that time there used to be what they call split shifts, where in the afternoon from 1 to 4, a ward would be run by somebody in training, which wouldn't happen today. But it was a huge responsibility, but also a great training, I think,
Baptism in fire.
Great training, but frightening sometimes,
Okay.
Frightening.
Thank you very much.
Yes.
Ethel, just have another question here for you, Ethel. Do you think the contribution of Irish nurses in Britain has been sufficiently or formally recognised by the British nursing establishment?
Generally, I don't think so, because the contribution has been huge, really. I mean, of course, other migrants have come as well, but at one time it was mainly the Irish, actually, at one time, yeah. So I think not, but I'm not sure how it would be recognized, I mean, for instance, the Queen has just given the George medal. It's George Cross, isn't it, to the NHS? Yeah, which is brilliant. Yeah, brilliant. And well, I've got two nurses in my book who got the George Medal, which is the civilian equivalent. Yeah, but anyway, that's another story. Yes. But I think, yes, I think not. But I think now, lately, there's a lot more, for instance, tonight, this program that's coming on, I was actually asked to take part in it, but they wanted nurses who trained in the 50s. So I give them the name of two people that I, with their permission, who were in my book. But one of them they already had, but the other nurse was unable to travel to London because of COVID. You know, it was just the wrong time, you know, for her. But Mary Duckett is in the program tonight, and so her story will be interesting. I mean, what she told me might be different to what she says tonight, so there'll be maybe more additions to her story. But no, I don't know if they're how it could be. I think now there's more programs, there's more research into what's been done, and also you know, I think that, I hope that will continue, and I think that's but as you know, I'm not sure about the British establishment, but I think the BBC is a British establishment, so that program tonight is on the BBC.
Fair enough.
So yes, so but I don't think it's just about nurses, it's about other NHS staff, which is fine. I mean, absolutely fine. I mean, other you know, there was it wasn't just Irish nurses that came, there was others that came as well. And I think the men's contribution is very important. I have a chapter on the men. I'm very interested in the men, and also in enrolled nurses, because they were given a very hard deal. And some, you know, were, you know, they didn't even know they were going to be enrolled nurses. They were just, you know, they either failed the entrance test or else they were downgraded after a short period of assessment. And they couldn't nurse anywhere else. They couldn't go to any other country, you know, so they were absolutely stuck. And it was, some felt it was a stigma. Some didn't tell their families or friends, you know.
Yeah.
And Mary Tilkey has, you know, also contributed to that debate. You know, they were, you know, but now, of course, that role doesn't exist. And some did the conversion course and became RGNs, you know, they got that opportunity, but it was long awaited, and you know, it was they played a very valuable role in nursing, they really did. And the men, I mean, men really were, a lot of men were recruited during the war, because the British men were away at war, and there was a shortage, especially in psychiatric hospitals, where they needed strong hands to deal with violent patients. So the men were recruited into psychiatric nursing. The men became, you know, numerous in the psychiatric hospitals. The other thing about the psychiatric hospitals in Ireland, I just say something about them. With the psychiatric hospitals in Ireland, they were unionized. They were, the posts were permanent and pensionable. So they never left. So it meant if any men wanted to do psychiatric nursing in Ireland, or even general nursing, because they couldn't get into general nursing for a long time, they couldn't do it. So that meant all of them came to England, really. They came here to train. And the men progressed up the ladder in management. You know, they especially in psychiatric nursing, but in general nursing later as well. And also, they didn't have family commitments, you see. That was another thing. They were full-time, you know, they weren't on night duty like a lot of the mothers were on night duty, and for years, you know, due to childcare. And the men were free to get promotion. So well done to them. Yeah.
Thank you, Ethel. We've had a comment from one of the participants. He remembers her mum telling her how life as a nurse could be very harsh as an Irish nurse. And we wonder whether you could comment on any experiences of discrimination in your research that you've uncovered, and perhaps how discrimination has been challenged, discrimination against people who were Irish nurses.
You mean discrimination against Irish nurses?
Yes, please.
Yes. Yes, I did ask my interviewees, I did ask them, you know, if they'd had any racial, you know, any comments, racial comments, or anything, you know, that was be upsetting. And I mean, quite not large numbers. Some didn't. Some never did, but some did, especially when the IRA bomb went off, you know. And unfortunately, there was quite a few of them during those periods, and comments could be made by colleagues. They could be made by well, outside the hospital, but I was just really dealing with within the hospital. Some colleagues who were not Irish would make a comment, and even some patients, you know, some patients as well. Yeah. I mean, and also it was embarrassing when those bombs went off, you know, because I mean, one nurse, you know, received racial abuse, and she didn't even know the bomb had gone off. You know, I mean, no knowledge, no, you know, this is, you know, but it's just, it's, you know, it's difficult. But it wasn't widespread. It was mostly when things happen. I mean, yeah. I mean, one nurse who. Not in the hospital, I mean, but when she went to move to a new house, she was told by the next door neighbour, when the next door neighbour found out they were an Irish family moving next door, the neighbour said to her, I don't want an Irish family. I didn't want another Irish family next to me. And later that neighbour tried to be friends with her. She soon realised what a wonderful family, who I know. What a wonderful family she had living next to her. She tried to be friends later. So I think, you know, yes. I mean, maybe she had a bad experience with one family. I mean, everybody is, you know, I mean, nobody is perfect, you know, this is it. But I think overall, you know, there was definitely some discrimination. But not in getting jobs, not in getting promotion, because I mean the Irish did quite very well with promotion. They did, compared to other races. Generally, they did very well with promotion. I mean, a lot of it was, of course, they didn't have any language problems. They were, you know, culturally, I mean, they ate more or less the same food, and you know, the same. You know, they weren't, you know, they weren't that different, really, you know. So they settled in better, I think, is how I would put it. How they settled in, you know, and they were able to go home easily, you know. I mean, one time it was more, you had to go by boat, which the journey could take 2 to 3 days between going and coming, and you know, we had you know. But now, of course, with planes, that doesn't happen, you know. Yeah.
Thank you, Ethel. We're coming to the end of our session today, so we're going to wrap up. I want to say a really big thank you to everybody who's joined us today. We've been joined by people from care homes, people who are dialing in from hospitals, people who are remembering their parents and their relatives who have worked as nurses from Ireland in the NHS here. We've had some lovely comments from people. I just wanted to read one comment from somebody who has joined, who says, just a second, I will find it. He has known you personally, and he says that it was an honour to know you as a junior nurse in Croydon many years ago, and that you were one of the kindest, most caring nurses, and such a support to this person. And they are forever grateful, and it's lovely to see you shining so brightly. As you know, Ethel's book has been launched this month. There are details of how to access it, how to purchase a copy on our website, and you can also contact us or contact Ethel about this. We encourage you to stay in touch with Irish in Britain if you would like to find out more information about what we do, and perhaps if you have skills as nurses or former nurses that you would like to contribute towards reminiscence around Irish nursing, we would love to hear from you. Ethel has mentioned an interesting programme that will be on tonight, our NHS, The Hidden History, and it's on at 8 o'clock on the BBC. We encourage you to watch it. It reflects on the contribution that migrants from many different communities, including the Irish, have made to the NHS. And I would just like to finish by saying a warm thank you to everybody that's joined for all of your lively questions. Please do continue to send questions in, and we may organise a future session at some point, or a future chance for those questions to be discussed as a group. So thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you all for listening.